All right, guys. Today we're beginning a new seminar. We are going to be working on Simone de Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity. So where to begin? I don't know. I mean, I think the big thing is probably by the time that people start consuming this and whatnot, they'll know that there is going to be a Noetic app.
Soon?
Very soon. And we'll give instructions about how to download that and whatnot. And I think I probably will make this a recurring thing where we're like, hey, we're not desperate for money, but like, you know, if you ever want to donate, there will be a way to donate so that we can make more programming like this. So, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. Before we get into the real substance of today, we're going to cover, I believe, like the first 20 pages of the Ethics of Ambiguity. Yes. I just wanted to spring something on Jordan that she's totally unprepared for.
Oh boy, yes, my favorite.
What do you think about this book? You've read it, and now you're rereading it, and you've gradually been sort of introduced to Simone de Beauvoir. What are your takeaways? I'll give mine, but I want you to go first.
Initial impressions. Holy cow! This is. Totally different animal. I am just so impressed by Simone.
Yeah.
Like, major girl crush.
Just elaborate on that. Why are you so impressed? Why is it different from? And if anyone's curious, we just finished a course on Augustine, which you can go and check out on the app. Why is this such a change? I mean, it is, but why is this such a shift in gear? Mm-hmm. And why is it so refreshing for you? Why are you so enamored with Simone de Beauvoir? Because I actually think that Augustine and Simone are probably the two thinkers that have affected me the most that we've studied, but I want to hear why you think that.
I mean, just because my focus is so, just like a laser focus on ancient world and, some kind of like some medieval stuff. But for the most part, this is just such a complete radical departure for me. It's just so overwhelmingly modern.
Does it make you uncomfortable?
It does, but then it also, I don't know.
But it's a good uncomfortable, right?
Exactly,
like
but it's
just
kind of like what Simone says. It's like this idea of the ambiguity that makes us nervous, but it's so vital to who we are. So,
and we'll get into all of that. Like, we'll have to figure out like why this text is so good at bestowing vitality. Because I actually think that a lot of what we do here at Noetic was really generated by me reading this text. It totally sort of transformed the way that I viewed being a professional. Mm-hmm. It emphasizes process over perfection. And like we kind of splay ourselves open here, and we struggle and we mess up, but that's okay. Right. Because like if we don't take those sort of risks and surrender ourselves to the process, we forever shut up these pearls to a world that may not always appreciate it. So like
right, and we become in a sense paralyzed by our own fears.
Right, and
things that might not even be realized.
I would say if I had not read this book, I don't know if you and I ever would have started working together. Because I don't know, I don't know if I would have been open to the idea of doing these freeform podcasts. When I first started doing the Noetic idea, it was like, okay, I'm going to make these really polished, pristine lectures and analysis and summaries, but then I had to remain open to other possibilities and sort of honoring the dignity of other people and what really made for an experience that would open other people up to possibility and self-disclosure. And we'll get into what those terms mean and things like that. And so I think by making it more populist and communitarian, by using things like discussion forums and podcasts and things like that, I mean, it's a real effect on the nature of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and I would say, I think that especially with like philosophy, it's just this idea that it's very entrenched and very static. Simone breathes life into it and gives it, I think, this like vitality that it's hard to find in other works,
Yeah, I mean, it's a different type of vitality. Because I would say that there's something super vital about what we just did with Augustine. Mm-hmm. Like, and I think we'll want to, at some point, discuss the compatibility of these different worldviews. Because
there's a certain fluidity, I think, to this that it's really refreshing. I'm not doing really good job of describing it. But
no, I think we'll
just
describe.
the way you interact with the text.
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit more like jazz and less like classical. I think. I don't know. I mean, do we want to give any sort of historical background on Simone? I mean, there'll be plenty ample of opportunity, and we'll learn about it. I mean, I think her reputation sort of precedes her, but she's a great existentialist thinker. She never really considered herself a philosopher or a feminist until later in her life.
She thought that she identified herself more as an author than anything.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, we can maybe like touch on it, as we go along. But there are two sources that I would like to just mention really fast. There's a really great lecture, and I found it on, of all places, YouTube, and it's called Simone de Beauvoir, Her Life and Philosophy by a professor named Wesley Cecil at Peninsula College in Washington.
Dude, I have to check it out.
And
what's it about?
Is a great, it's just about her kind of, he gives a really great recap of her life, her education, and just how impressive of just a mind and intellect, and just she's just a really awesome person. He calls her, quote, a most impressive human being. Yeah. So he injects a lot of humor and just does a really great job explaining her life and her work.
Yeah, what are some notable details from her life that maybe we should pass on now? I mean, the biggest thing, right, is her romantic and professional involvement with Sartre. I mean, I think that dynamic between the two of them is something that people have written books about. It simultaneously symbolizes like what it means to be an empowered woman, but there are other people who read it differently and think she was marginalized by Sartre. I don't know. I don't really have a dog in that fight, but I think it's notable, right, that what her knowledge may be fed off of, and whose knowledge she may have been feeding into. It's a question of like, where does Sartre end and she begins, and vice versa. Like, right. I think that's pretty interesting to contextualize her. I mean, the other big thing is to contextualize her within sort of the continental and other philosophical movements that were going on at the time. She was definitely a respondent to Hegel, which I can pretend to understand, but I don't really understand. But I mean, I think she was living and writing at the time of World War II. And studying complex thinkers like Hegel and trying to relate it to the real world. And you're like, how do I study Hegel when I see everything around me bombed? Right? Exactly. Like if like all the churches and all the cityscape is totally leveled by war, how does this strange German figure matter? And a lot of her writing is going to be a response to trying to make philosophy matter.
Yeah, and it's like reconciling philosophy with, I mean, given Simone de Beauvoir's generation, I mean, I would just lose faith in everything. Just seeing that level of atrocity and like the just absolute, just like seeing the worst of humanity.
Well, then you can see a historical contextualization why she's going to reject things that we'll talk about, like unconditional value and traditional religious structures and things like that, and opt for a more existentialist perspective. Right. And even traditional modes of philosophical thought too. Mm-hmm. So she's going to be abandoning, at least she's going to try to abandon people that greatly shaped her mind, like Kant and Hegel. Right. But what's interesting? I think I say this all the time. Who's a good sort of bridge between Augustine and Simone is Kierkegaard, and she'll talk about Kierkegaard too. I think Simone de Beauvoir would, if you were, I think it's fair to think of her as more of a secular Kierkegaard in some way. I think she follows Kierkegaard's program up to the ethical point. She doesn't make any sort of religious leaps or anything like that. And then I think she, with greater specificity and detail, will develop the Kierkegaardian ethical project, which is, some people argue, an extension of the Kantian project. And so, you could make
how far back do you want to go?
Yeah, is Simone de Beauvoir like the first Kierkegaardian ethicist or the last Kantian ethicist, or is she her own ethicist? How does she, and CJ and I
don't know.
CJ and I wrestle with these questions all the time about when do we, because we tend to think of philosophers as being these great people.
Right.
But they definitely have influences and people they're indebted to. So
yeah, I think we tend to kind of think of things in a continuum of thought, but that's not necessarily how it works. I tend to think of philosophers in this nice, neat little timeline, and so comes after so, but it's more just kind of like a scribbles everywhere, leading with like 1,000 different arrows to a bunch of different people and a bunch of different things.
I go back and forth on that view. Sometimes I think it's like totally a mess and like people are just really disparate. And then sometimes I really do think that the great ones really just supplanted one another. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the right view is, but it seems like to me, when I really study them in detail, that they're really just finishing each other's sentences.
Right, so could it be almost like Augustine, where we see all these like crazy, weird, chaotic things going on, but then we look at the big picture. Like,
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Or if it's like branching or whatever, because I definitely think that there are going to be moments, since we are so steeped in the Augustine, where we will draw parallels between Simone naturally, because that's where our head has been. So we'll have to see about that. I don't know. I mean, is there... I guess I've kind of shown my cards a little bit about what I think about her. I think she's tremendous. And what's funny is that I was telling Jordan this earlier. Some people think that maybe in my lecture series I'm a little hard on Simone. Yeah. And that maybe that, I don't know, maybe someone could even say that I was being sexist because I was being hard on Simone. But I think if you detect that, all I want to say is I really think she's one of the best thinkers ever. And I really idolize her, and if I ever came down hard on her, is because it was just kind of like I'm so in love with her. It's like kind of like when someone you love kind of disappoints you,
right?
And I'm not really that hard on her. There was just like one thing that I kind of had problems with, and maybe by the time we go through this podcast, I'll totally change my mind, But I definitely don't want people to think that I'm trying to marginalize this figure at all.
Right. She's such an intellectual heavyweight. It's just wow.
Yeah. And I think I don't know. I mean, there are not very many philosophy books that I've read that really have just changed the outlook that I have on the entire world. Like, there have been a lot of philosophy books that I've read that I'm like, man, that was really beautiful, or this or that. But there's only been like 5 that I was just like, okay, I'm changing the direction of my life of. And I think if I had to name them, I'd probably say like maybe Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals, maybe the 5 Dialogues of Plato, Socrates, whoever you want to attribute them to, any number of Kierkegaard's works. I don't know. I mean, and then this, I would put this probably in my top 5, to be honest.
I mean, I'm only 50 pages in, and this is like a formative work for me.
Yeah. See, like we're gonna see. I think when we started the Augustine, you were at one place and you went somewhere else, right? Yeah. Like I think when we started the Augustine, you were maybe more. Do I want to say?
Yeah. No, I'll let you say it.
Well,
I'm curious.
Maybe let's just say this. After studying Augustine closely, you became more sympathetic to his religious viewpoint. I wonder if Simone is going to correct this, and she's going to make you more secular again.
Yeah, who knows?
And the thing for me is that I'm enamored by both of them, and I don't know if they necessarily exclude one another. She talks as if I
necessarily think they do.
Well, she's anti-Christian.
And
she's going to be anti-religious on anything.
Will, though. The will.
I don't know. I think I see a lot of these philosophers. I see a lot of these philosophers is like, even when they say they're not Christian, I'm like, you're too. I'm just kind of like, I mean, it's kind of like how people think Socrates eventually became a Christian.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, Simone, like, you're really not that far away from Christianity. People probably hate cringing when I say that. She says this much. She says the ethics of ambiguity resembles a lot of the idea of Christian love. So, I don't know. And maybe this is the way you have your cake and eat it too. Maybe this is how you can have the Christian ethical theory or the
without the hang-ups.
Without the acknowledgement of God. If that's what's preventing you from having it, you know? Maybe this is a way that you can split the difference.
Yeah, kind of like reconcile the two.
Well, I don't know. Should we do any more preamble, or do you think did you have any other sources you wanted to give a shout out to as far as what helped you understand this?
Other than Wesley Cecil's lecture, which was awesome, an online resource is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. That actually has like a really good overview.
It's really good on everything.
Everything in general, but especially her just kind of giving like a really good context and a breakdown of, her works and stuff like that, and how they kind of all piece
Did
together.
Did the Stanford Encyclopedia do what we do? Did it go in depth to the ethics of ambiguity, or because this isn't the only book she wrote. She's mostly known for her feminist book, the Second Sex, right? And Simone de Beauvoir, whatever this means, I'm not a student of feminism, so I don't know exactly how to categorize the different waves. But from what I understand, she's typically associated with the second wave of feminism. Do you know what that means?
I mean, I think maybe would the first wave be kind of more
like the suffragist movement or something like that?
like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan, B. Anthony, and all those lovely ladies.
How do you think of second wave? I've never thought about it. I guess we'd have to read The Second Sex.
Yeah, I think that we'd have to dive into that to figure that out.
An 800-page book.
Add it to the list.
Oh my God. Oh God! Please give us money so I can hire somebody to do that. Okay, maybe I'll pay Jordan to do it. Oh my God! Yeah. Okay, all right. So
I would do it without money, but yeah. You should totally.
Oh, wait till you get into the finite details of an 800-page book. You'll be like, "Oh my God, what did I bite off
over
here?"
My head. Yeah. No, I take it
back. You're gonna be like, "Oh my God, I'll be working on this for the next 5 years." Okay, so we should probably just jump into it. I think we've done enough of an introduction or whatever, and we've got plenty of stuff to talk about.
That we do.
So we're gonna skip over the introduction. I'm gonna go right from start page 7, and she's trying to articulate here at the beginning of the book what exactly is the ambiguous condition of man. All right, so she says man understands himself to be a paradox, and what does she mean by that? What is the paradox that Simone de Beauvoir is getting at here? What is this ambiguous condition that he feels himself to be? How do you understand it?
I kind of understood this idea that, we're to a degree able to escape our natural condition of sort of saying, okay, we're slightly better than animals, but we never can fully free ourselves from it.
Well, Art, why would we think that we're slightly better than animals? What is it about man that distinguishes himself from animals?
Well, the rational
right.
thought.
So the paradox that is man is that he's a rational animal. Right. But why does this make us so uneasy? Why does this give us such nausea and feelings of ambiguity? Because at the same time that we feel our superiority, what do we all also feel?
Well, we have that kind of gnawing sense of inferiority that we can never really quite. It seems to me kind of like a hole that you can never really fill.
Right. So what is that sense of that we have this sense of supremacy, and if you're like, Luke, just say it already.
Just out with it, man.
All right. Well, what I'm trying to say here is, at the same time that man recognizes himself to be of higher consciousness and be like the ruler of everything in the physical world, right? Like within that divine.
There's that vulnerability at the same time where it's I master the universe, but I can also be crushed by it in a blink.
Yeah, I can be annihilated so easily.
Crazy. Yeah.
And Simone will get to this later in what we're going to talk about today, but I might as well say it right now. You can understand why she felt like this was a situation that was heightened during the time that she was living. Like when you see millions of people cut down by machine guns and landmines and atomic bombs and things like that, at the same time, man is extending his dominion over all the earth, right? And totally manipulating nature and subduing nature and being like, I am the best, and beating his chest. What does he go and do? He goes and annihilates humanity and reduces the individual to mere matter, right? So at this particular time in history, never has man felt such lofty heights, but also
so insecure, underneath all of that accomplishment.
His fragility has never been made
so acute.
Yeah. So
it's palpable. It's and it's interesting. I think in a way, I really identified with this in terms of from sort of a classicist view, because especially with the Romans, their mindset and their worldview was very much this idea that you were living in a very hostile world. So the gods didn't love you, and everything and everyone was out to get you. So this idea that, the Romans accomplished so much, but they were constantly looking over their shoulder.
Right. Wow. Well, so does it obvious what the ambiguous condition is, right? I think we have spelled it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So what does she do after she sort of spells out what the ambiguous condition does?
She then, I mean, this is my understanding of it, is she kind of goes through a lot of the different strategies that people do to kind of shoo away this ambiguity and just kind of sweep it under the rug or make people feel comfortable.
Yeah. So she says that philosophers have typically fallen into like 3 camps for how they deal with this.
Yeah.
And we'll have to sort of elaborate. I can say it and it'll sound fancy, but I don't know if we really understand it. So maybe we should try to get our minds around it. And I just rattle it off in the lecture like, oh, I know what she's saying. But I think we should probably take a minute to figure this out. She says philosophers have either reduced mind to matter. Okay, so I want to ask, what does that mean? Is she talking about physicalism? And we'll have to explain what physicalism is. Reduce matter to mind. And again, does that mean everything is just mind or spirit? Are we talking about pantheism, Christianity, something else? It's a little confusing for me. Or synthesize them into a unified substance. And I didn't know if she meant Hegel here, or if this is the Christian view, or whatever. So let's break this down. Let's go one by one.
Right.
Reduce mind to matter, okay? I think what this idea is trying to do is kind of bring about absolute unity through like this sort of understanding that like we're all the same, right? In a sense that there is no individualized spirit or whatever, that we're all sort of made of the same material. So like, you know how like there's like Carl Sagan be like, we're all made of stars, right? Like it's sort of this idea, like we're
just a collection of atoms.
Yeah, and that this is somehow supposed to soothe our soul. Does that soothe your soul to know that you're made of stars, Jordan? Does that help you with your ambiguous condition? Oh, it's okay.
I'm a star.
It's okay that I'm going to die and that my rational consciousness is going to like cease to be, and there's no afterlife and stuff like that. Because guess what? I was once a star, and it's all good. Does that bring any psychological palliative effect for you?
I mean, that's kind of like a little bit with Epicureanism, that we're just kind of this big, we're just atoms in this big ebb and flow of just matter and particles just kind of floating around out there.
Do you think that works? Do you think that works with our ambiguous condition? Do you think it's
not necessarily with the ambiguous condition?
Yeah. Well, Simone's going to say that that's fundamentally inadequate, right? That like people will tell themselves that this is actually soothing themselves, but like the fact of the matter is they're an existential wreck.
Yeah. Like
they're lying to themselves through that. All right. So what about this reduce matter to mind? What is it? So
is that you just say everything's imbued with some sort of like spirit or like some sort of I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know if this is kind of the view of. I don't know if this would be the view like where like we're all just. I don't know if this is the Hegelian view or if this is the Christian view. And this raises our larger question: is what's the difference between the Christian and the Hegelian view?
That was going to be my follow-up question. Was what?
Well, this is interesting because there's not uniformity on what Hegel said. You have.
Oh boy.
So there you have. They're center, right, and left Hegelians. Right Hegelians view Hegel as like a Protestant St. Thomas Aquinas, but then leftist Hegelians view him as a proto-Marxist and total materialist.
What?
And then there are people who are some gradation in between. There are people who there are some people who think he was a passionate Christian, and then there are people who think like Christianity was just something to. It may have been the highest.
Time with?
Well, it was the way. I'm totally simplifying Hegel, but the idea being that different religions are something that men transcend. So maybe maybe pantheism, and then polytheism, and then monotheism, then Christianity. And mankind kind of
just almost evolves
into different sort of religions, and eventually enters into a collective consciousness, and hence why the Marxist paradigm becomes a plausible one. The way that Hegel or maybe Marx even described it was that it was like a snake sloughing off its skins. If you can imagine like a snake shedding its skins, that spirit is it's the thing that endures, but all these religious forms are things that it ultimately jettisons as it
does it like
evolves.
Transcend like over time then?
Yeah. That the idea is that God is working God, spirit, mind, whatever you want to call it. And this is the confusion, depending on your right, left, or centeredness as a Hegelian, that depending on how you view it, mind or God or consciousness or whatever is making itself more manifest through the history of mankind.
Whoa.
So it's super fascinating, but also super confusing because it depends on what interpretive lens you look at it. So, she's going to say that. Now, I don't know if that's the Hegelian view that she's criticizing there as the reducing matter to mind, or if she means kind of like more of a like, maybe like like some sort of religious perspective that thinks we're all some sort of like spirit, like we're all just sort of like God, like we're all just like sort of fig players in God's dream. All the world's a stage when players or something. I don't. What is it? What is Shakespeare say? All the world's a stage.
You lost.
I don't remember.
You put me on the spot so many times, and that's when I'm just throwing my hands up.
Yeah. So, but what would be problematic about that if we viewed the entire world as spirit, right? Well, because it would make.
Yeah.
I think the problem would be is that our lives don't matter.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Is just like, what about like I don't know consequence and stuff like that, and just I feel like I would just lose touch with reality.
Well, I think you would.
I think I'd be like, I'm just spirit, so it doesn't really like the physical world would have absolutely no bearing on anything I did.
Right. So I mean, and also nothing would have any bearing on it. I think the idea here is that your life is not real. I think the idea is
just pure existence. Is that?
Well, I think the idea is that your life doesn't really matter to you. If you see everybody as sort of. If you see all matter being reduced to this like larger consciousness or whatever, the individual doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
And that's all about the collective.
Right, and that's the Kierkegaardian critique of Hegel, which I think Simone is sensitive to, is that the Hegelian understanding of these different religious forms and the transcendence of like higher consciousness throughout humanity negates the value of the person.
Right,
and it's all about
basically just strips any sort of sense of individuality.
Yeah, and so like it does violence to our fundamental feelings of self-worth.
Yeah,
and that's why this doesn't really
and accountability.
It can.
If you kind of, it's like that idea with mob mentality. You know what I mean? If you can hide behind a collective, then you can kind of just do whatever you want, right?
Right, and Simone
just say, oh well, it wasn't just me doing it; it was like the whole group.
Right, and Simone's going to be we're not going to get to it today because we have too much to cover, but Simone's an anti-Marxist. She's not going to be in favor of the collective precisely because of that, because the collective presents ossified values that allow us to get away with absolute BS. Right? It's like if we legitimate ourselves in regards to the crowd, we can do horrible things. And obviously she's sensitive to what happened to Germany.
Yeah.
That you had such an educated public justifying themselves in regards to the mob that all the philosophers, all the musicians, got swept up in the mob mentality and totally negated the individuality of the Jewish people or the other subjugated homosexuals or the Romanian population. Yeah. Anything that was anti-Aryan or non-Aryan in their eyes was going to be something that could be annihilated.
People who were like physically or like mentally disabled. I mean, I mean anyone that wasn't
useful to the eugenic program.
Yeah,
that
and
they
also,
had.
and like in scare quotes, like useful,
We're going to get to that usefulness thing because it's interesting how we're getting at how much the history probably. I didn't think about this much, and I'm glad we're talking about it.
I was even thinking about it too. Like think about like the French Revolution.
Schiller. If anyone's interested in that, Schiller is definitely the Schillerian project is definitely motivated by the sensitivity to the French Revolution. Yeah. So I think hers is more springing out of the totalitarianism that she's seeing in Europe,
especially because the Nazis occupied Paris. So
But if anyone's curious about how Schiller deals with totalitarian movements or things that have like hues of fascism, you might want to check out the Schiller stuff that CJ and I did. Okay, and then the third view is that we synthesize them into a unified substance. And I don't know if this is the Hegelian view or whatever, if this is the Christian view or whatever, that essentially, I mean, Augustine talks about how there's like a body and a soul, right? Like that,
the dualism.
Right. That they maintain the materiality and the spirituality. So it really depends on what sect of Christianity and what sect of Hegelianism. But why might this unified view be problematic?
I mean, she makes a good point because it minimizes the role of death, because either you deny it. You either just say, oh, well, it's a part of life. Like when you say, like, when you explain to a kid, like, why there's, like, a dead baby bunny on the side of the road, like, oh, well, death is just a part of life. Or you promise mortality.
Yeah, so this issue, right, it's the downplaying of death and sort of positing like there will be another realm where things are taken care of one day. And this does seem like kind of like the Christian view. There's some deeper truth behind it or whatever. The problem becomes, well, I think she sees that when you maintain the duality, there are two routes. She says there are two predictable ethical paths that occur. And I think one is that you concentrate on becoming ethically pure for the sake of winning favor with God, right?
Right. So it becomes more of a function of acting to justify the end instead of just the means.
Yeah, the intentionality of one's ethical performance matters less than placating the God on high.
Right.
Right? And we'll have to assess whether or not that's truly a problem. Or the other view is that it focuses so much on the bodily element that we become just terribly hedonistic, right? Like,
right, yeah. It's like, I think she made some sort of, I don't know if this is it exactly, but you have like either two parts that can't be saved. Either you plunge yourself into what Augustine would call inordinate desires, and you lose your soul, or your soul's damned, or...
Look what you're doing. You're bringing Augustine into
or,
it. Yeah.
If you strive for like wisdom and completely deny your body, then you just kind of like, I don't know, like you just ignore your like actual physical self, Yeah. So it's kind of like either way, it's kind of like a lose-lose situation, Either you deny your body or you deny your soul.
Yeah. So I guess the question is this really a problem, right? So that's what I had in. So is it really the case that, and I think it's kind of a simplistic view, but we'll address this sort of throughout or whatever. Is it really the case that if you are religious, that you can't have pure ethical intentionality? I don't know if that is necessarily the case, and I wonder if she prematurely rejects God on those reasons. Like, because I mean, obviously, I don't think Kierkegaard would say that that this is an either or, that you either are ethically that you're ethically constituted or you're religiously constituted. For Kierkegaard, the ethical is brought along into the religious sphere.
Right, and that's kind of, I mean, because what if you acted in an ethical manner out of love for God?
Yeah, I mean,
not just, I'm scared of God, so I'm going to do everything to, like, make sure I don't go to hell, but out of, like, a genuine, pure love for God.
Yeah, and Kant tries to do this, too. Kant tries to have totally self-justifying ethics, but then sort of slips God in there. So he tries to have his cake and eat it, too. But we'll have to figure out how that could happen. But neither of these ethical views console our paradoxical, ambiguous condition, right?
Right.
And she says that they heighten it. I wanted to test that out. Like, I'm not necessarily sure that's the case. Like, for instance, let's think about that for a second. Like the fact that we may like sort of posit an afterlife or a God or whatever. How does that heighten or problematize the fact that we are rational animals? Like, I'm not saying that God doesn't make our life more difficult, but how might that contribute to the ambiguous condition or the paradoxical nature of man. It's someone at home is probably being like screaming at us, being like, it's so obvious, but I'm having trouble grasping that right now.
Yeah, it's eluding me right now. If someone knows.
Yeah, no, I know what she's. I mean, I know what she's going to say, but I don't necessarily want to spill the beans. But I don't know if I necessarily feel that way as someone who's speaking on behalf of the God community. I don't know. Right. I don't know if I feel my nature to be so lofty and to be so fragile and to have it amplified as much. I think it bothered me more before I had gotten to that perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for me to get out of it. It's hard for me to stop believing in God and get into her perspective and say that it's better to have a completely secular existential ethic. It's hard for me to say. It's like, how do you get out of your skin to diagnose what's the better perspective? I can say what it was like to be secular, mm-hmm. but I didn't have an existential ethic. But I think when I was secular, or not finding God yet, maybe having some sort of vague spirituality or something like that, I was constantly obsessed with dying. I was constantly obsessed with doing the right thing. But now that I'm not secular, I don't worry about death, mm-hmm. and I don't worry about perfect moral action like I did. I kind of just do my best, and that's okay. But I think she's concerned that most people, when they adopt a religious perspective, give up too easily on the issues of death and ethical performance, and therefore
because they kind of just use the sort of the stopgap of well God will I'll seek God's forgiveness and He'll absolve me.
Yeah,
I'll be good.
And if God fixes everything one day, I think maybe she's thinking that religion, as it's generally conceived, makes people care about their lives less and perhaps plays up their irrelevance maybe more, or in other people's irrelevance too.
Or like an indifference.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It could just say, well, this is just an affair of this world and I'm not going to concern myself with it.
I don't feel, but
because I think she wants us to like step into the ring and like make a definitive stance.
Yeah, and I think truthfully, I think authentic Christianity, or maybe any authentic religious point of view, wants us to do the same. I think she maybe cartoonishly maybe portrays Christianity. I can say that when sort of like when I feel those moments, or when I'm most dedicated to my bodily pleasures or whatever, are oftentimes when I am the most susceptible to feelings of ennui and despair and whatnot. Yeah. And that's a big thing that Kierkegaard talks about, is that ultimately, like when we go about chasing all these gratifying aesthetic ends or whatever, that it culminates in some sort of despair, whether it be in romance or even intellectual thought or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, I think she's very inspired by Kierkegaard here. I think she even says this much at some point. She does reference Kierkegaard here early, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Augustine, like you keep chasing those inordinate desires and like they're just, it's never enough,
Yeah.
Which can lead to despair.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about how technology has amplified the ambiguous condition, so I'm going to skip over that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this whole idea of what you were talking about, how Simone wants us to step into the ring. She wants us to stare down the ambiguous condition. Why? I mean, why is it so essential to embrace it and to try to deal with it? What do you think?
I think that, I mean, it's so like brave of her. I think she just makes like this like really like pretty staunch accusation. She just says, other philosophies and other systems just keep tiptoeing around it. And she just says, we need to embrace it because we need to like understand that we are confusing paradoxical creatures, and we need to embrace it and really make that like a springboard, you know what I mean, for a source of like a will to live and to act, which is kind of
I think
finding clarity in that confusion is confusing.
I think part of it is that I think she's concerned if we don't acknowledge the ambiguous condition,
it's going to just consume us.
Well, I think she thinks that if we become religious or we become hedonistic, or hedonists or whatever, that we're ultimately going to become totally uninterested in ethical performance. Mm-hmm. And if we become totally uninterested in ethical performance, then, we see what happens when people give themselves over to groupthink.
Right.
And
it's so hard for us to, especially our generation, to like remember the context, really.
But it's still at work, right? It's not like we've stopped the groupthink. We don't have Hitler now, but like we have objective groupthink on a very palpable level. I just don't know if it's directly killing people like Hitler was doing. It's just, but it is sort of numbing and killing our souls, and we see it. I think we probably see it amplified by a lot of technology, Instagram and Facebook and things like that. There's definitely like this hive mind that says you think this and you wear that and you look like this and you do that because this is what is good and normal. And I mean, where does that leave people like you and me? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, no offense, but you're not normal.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, both of us, right? Like, where do we fit in Facebook world, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
I mean that in the most, but I mean that about you in the most endearing way, because I think that's what brought us together, is that we're both so strange. But it took Simone to open me up to the possibilities of doing this in a public way, and then I think that was attractive to you, and you wanted to be a part of it. And I don't know, maybe we'll reshape it, but then maybe we'll
buy into it.
Yeah, then maybe we'll
perpetuate it.
Yeah, maybe we'll ossify our own ethos, and then like someone will need to break us down, and
exactly.
Maybe you'll fly solo one day. Oh no! Oh no!
Okay.
I might have had a computer problem.
Okay, all right.
Oh,
Brief
God.
glitch. I think it's okay.
Okay.
Right.
Watch this whole thing crash. Sorry, guys. We were having some computer issues. We might want to do a two-parter just in case.
Oh,
to check, to be sure, because if we get an hour and a half into this.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Okay, well, let's get to a stopping point here. I think that was probably a good stopping point. I think in the second part here, we'll start talking about the objection that the existentialist ethic is useless.
Yeah.
Like because the idea here is that Simone is saying that well, if we don't stare down the ambiguous condition, then ethics goes away altogether. But then someone will be like, well, what's the point of this, right? And she's going to sort of try to address the charge of usefulness. Here in the next section.
Yeah, and just the idea of like she's really fearless about the charges of saying, oh well, if you follow an existentialist, ethical code, then you just become like really self-absorbed and like you just become like your own island. And she's just like, no.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
All right, well, let's stop it there, and we'll check our computer, and then we'll do the second installment. All right, bye guys.
Bye everyone.